The town of Point Borealis vanished, not evacuated, not dead, just gone, erased between one heartbeat and the next. They left everything behind, everything except their footprints, and this journal. My name is Elias Vance. I was the communications technician. I am the reason there is no one left to scream. The first thing you learn about Point Borealis is the silence. It's not an absence of sound. It's a presence, a physical weight in the air that presses down on your ears and settles deep in your bones. Out here on the knife's edge of the Alaskan Arctic, the world is stripped down to its essential elements: the endless, aching white of the tundra, the bruised purple of the sky, and the wind. The wind is the town's only real voice, and it speaks a language of utter indifference. It scours the land, polishes the ice, and whispers promises of a cold so absolute it can freeze a man's soul before his heart gives out. My name is Elias Vance. For 27 years, I've been the senior communications technician for this forgotten little outpost of 73 souls. My job is to maintain the fragile umbilical cord that connects us to the outside world, a web of satellites, high-frequency radios, and copper lines that feel more like historical artifacts with each passing winter. I am a man of logic, of frequencies and waveforms, of cause and effect. In a place governed by the sheer brutal chaos of nature, my station is a temple of order. Every dial is calibrated, every wire is sealed, every signal is logged. Here it's a small, sane bubble in an ocean of beautiful, terrible madness. But sanity here has a different definition. The old-timers, the ones whose families have been here since the whaling days, they live by a different set of laws. Not laws of physics, but laws of survival, passed down like grim heirlooms. They call them the precautions. To an outsider, they sound like the ramblings of the isolated and insane. Rule number 7. If the aurora dances in a spiral, kill the lights and get indoors. Don't look up until the sky is black again. Rule number 14. The ice fogs that form on moonless nights have shapes in them. Never try to focus on them. Rule number 21. Sometimes you'll see a light on the tundra, miles out, where no light should be. You are to turn your back to it and walk home. You do not run. You do not acknowledge it. I've seen engineers and scientists come and go. They laugh at these rules. They bring their textbooks and their instruments and try to explain everything away as temperature inversions, magnetic anomalies, or mass psychogenic illness. They try to impose their rational world onto this place. They never stay long. Point Borealis has a way of showing you that the universe is much older, stranger, and less concerned with your understanding of it than you can possibly imagine. I don't laugh at the rules. I follow them. Because I've spent 27 years listening to the static between worlds. I've heard the whispers on the radio during solar storms that sound too much like my mother's voice. I've seen the sky turn a color that science has no name for. And I know about the most important rule of all, the one that is never spoken of, only known. The final rule: Channel 0 stays silent. You might hear something knock. You never, ever answer. 2 weeks ago, they sent me an assistant. His name is David Chen. He's brilliant, fresh out of MIT, with a mind like a steel trap, and a face that hasn't yet learned that arrogance is a liability in a place where the cold can kill you in 5 minutes. He arrived with 2 Pelican cases full of advanced diagnostic tools and a tablet loaded with scientific papers he's eager to quote. He sees the town as a problem to be solved, a collection of quaint, superstitious data points to be corrected. He sees me as part of the problem. "It's incredible, Elias," he told me on his second day, gesturing to my meticulously maintained Collins KWM2 transceiver. "It's a museum piece. My phone has more processing power." He wasn't being cruel, just factual. He lives in a world of clean data and predictable outcomes. I live in a world where I've learned to trust the goosebumps on my arms more than a spectral analyzer. The tension between us was a low hum, always present under the surface of our professional courtesies. He would optimize my systems, and I would quietly return them to their original reliable state after he left. He saw my adherence to the old ways, the precautions, as a personal failing. "Barometric pressure drops and low-frequency infrasound," he explained one evening, after old Maeve from the general store called in a panic about a groaning in the earth. "It can cause feelings of dread and auditory hallucinations. It's all perfectly explainable. I just nodded. There's no point arguing. You can't explain the color of fear to a man who's never seen it. The storm started yesterday. It wasn't a normal blizzard. This was a living thing. A white beast that descended from the north and swallowed the world whole. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. It tore at the walls of the comm station, a constant shrieking assault that vibrated through the floor and into my teeth. Within hours we were an island in a sea of white fury. The satellite link was the first to go, overwhelmed by the sheer density of the snow and atmospheric charge. Then the internet lines, which run on poles across the tundra, snapped under the strain. That left us with the high-frequency radio, our last, most primitive connection. For a while we could hear the crackle of distant stations, faint voices from a world that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Then that too was consumed by the storm's roar, a wall of static so thick it felt solid. We were officially cut off. It's a situation I've been through a dozen times. The protocol is simple. You conserve power, you keep the systems warm, you ride it out. David, however, was buzzing with a nervous energy. This was his first real Arctic event, a trial by fire. He paced the small room, his eyes darting from one monitor to another, running diagnostics that were telling him nothing. "The ionization is off the charts," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "This isn't just a weather pattern. It's like the entire magnetosphere is in flux directly above us." "It's a storm, David," I said, my voice calm. "It does what it wants. We do what we must. We wait." He scoffed, a quiet, dismissive sound. "Waiting isn't a solution. It's an absence of one." It was around 0200 hours when it happened. I was dozing in my chair, the rhythmic shriek of the wind having become a strange sort of lullaby. David shook me awake. His face was pale in the green glow of the monitors, but his eyes were wide with a predatory excitement. "Elias, you need to see this." He pointed to the main console, to the frequency display for Channel 0, the emergency broadcast channel, a channel that hasn't been used in 50 years. It's a dead channel. The hardware that once fed into it was decommissioned before I even started here. There is no transmitter in this town, or in this entire sector, that operates on that frequency. It should be pure dead silence, but it wasn't. A perfect clean sine wave pulsed on the oscilloscope. It wasn't static. It wasn't noise. It was a signal. It was a slow, rhythmic pulse. Thump, thump. A pause. Thump, thump. It was the sound of a colossal heartbeat, deep, resonant, and impossibly clear, as if it was coming from right next door. The blood drained from my face. I could feel a cold that had nothing to do with the storm seeping into my marrow. Every hair on my body stood on end. I knew this signal. Not because I had heard it before, but because every instinct, every whispered story, every unspoken rule in this town had prepared me for it. It was the knock on the door. "What is that?" David whispered, his scientific curiosity overriding any sense of fear. "The frequency is impossibly low, subhertz, and the power. It's broadcasting with enough energy to punch through this storm like it's not even there. Where is it coming from?" "We turn it off," I said, my voice hoarse. I reached for the console. David blocked my arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Are you insane? This is a first contact scenario. It could be a new natural phenomenon, a deep Earth beacon, a military experiment. We have to analyze it. We have to respond." "No." My voice was flat, final. "The rule, David. The one rule that matters. We do not engage. We do not acknowledge. We turn it off and we forget we ever heard it." He stared at me, his expression hardening from excitement to contempt. "You're talking about folk tales, superstitions. I'm talking about our job, Elias. What if it's a distress call? A downed vessel? A submarine under the ice? To ignore a signal on an emergency channel is a criminal dereliction of duty." "It's a dead channel," I almost shouted, my composure finally cracking. "Nothing can transmit on it because nothing is connected to it. Don't you understand? It's not supposed to be there." "Not supposed to be is what Discovery is all about," he shot back. He pushed me away from the console, his eyes glued to the screen. He began typing furiously, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He was isolating the signal, cleaning it, analyzing its source. The data scrolling across the screen made no sense. The point of origin was everywhere, and nowhere. The signal wasn't traveling to us, it felt like it was simply emerging. "I'm sending a reply," he announced, his voice steady with conviction. A simple, standard acknowledgement pulse, a digital knockback, to let them know we hear them. "David, for the love of God, don't," I pleaded, the words feeling useless as soon as they left my mouth. "You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what this place is." He looked at me over his shoulder, a flicker of pity in his eyes. "I know that we don't let fear of the dark stop us from exploring, old man." He turned back to the console, his finger hovering over the transmit key. The thump-thump of the signal continued its steady, hypnotic beat, a patient, ancient rhythm. The wind screamed outside. In that moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. He pressed the key. A single, sterile ping echoed in the room. A tiny, insignificant sound. Our response, our acknowledgement, sent out into the storm, into the dead channel, into the great silent unknown. The effect was instantaneous. The thump-thump stopped, not faded, not distorted. It just ceased to exist, as if it had never been there. The sine wave on the oscilloscope flatlined. The silence on the channel was suddenly as profound and absolute as the signal had been. And then, the wind outside stopped. 1 second, it was a physical force trying to tear the building apart. The next, there was nothing. No howl, no whisper, no sound at all. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was deafening, terrifying. It was the silence of a dead planet. We both stood frozen, staring at the speakers. The silence was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. Then, through the window, I saw the lights of the town flicker. Once, twice. And then, every single light in Point Borealis went out. The generators, the backups, everything. Our small station was plunged into darkness, saved only by the faint emergency battery-powered glow of the monitors. David stood motionless, his face a mask of disbelief. He was trying to find a rational explanation, a logical sequence of events. A power surge from the signal, a coincidental lull in the storm. But I could see the terror creeping into the edges of his eyes. He was finally seeing the color of fear. "My hand is shaking so badly, I can barely hold this pen. The emergency lights won't last forever. David thinks he broke a local superstition, a silly, archaic rule. I know better. He didn't just break a rule. He answered a call, and somewhere, out there in the all-consuming dark, something has just picked up the phone. If you are reading this, if you want to know what answered that call, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. The next entry will be, soon. I have to save the battery. Darkness has a texture. We forget this in the civilized world, where artificial light keeps it at bay, reducing it to a mere inconvenience. But out here, in the absolute crushing blackness that followed the shutdown, I remembered. It's a thick, velvety thing, heavy as a burial shroud. The air itself felt different, denser, possessed of an acoustic deadness that swallowed sound before it could fully form. The only light was the ghostly green glow of the monitors on their last dregs of battery power, painting David's face in sickly hues of shock and dawning comprehension. "It has to be an EMP," he whispered, the sound unnervingly loud in the new silence. The signal must have carried a massive electromagnetic pulse, fried every unprotected circuit in town. He was clinging to his science, using it as a shield against the impossible thing that had just happened. "The generators are shielded, David," I replied, my own voice a low croak. "So is the station's core system. They're designed to withstand a direct lightning strike. This wasn't a surge. This was a switch being flipped." We spent the first hour in that suffocating darkness, a pair of ghosts haunting a tomb of dead technology. David, true to his nature, tried to solve the problem. He worked methodically, checking breakers, running diagnostics on the internal power supply, his movements crisp and efficient. But a growing desperation began to fray the edges of his professionalism. Every test came back the same. The machinery was fine. The power was simply gone, not cut, not failed, vanished. As the backup batteries on the monitors finally died, plunging us into a blackness so complete I couldn't see my own hand in front of my face, a new fear began to dawn. The sun was due to rise in 3 hours, but in that moment, The concept of a sunrise felt like a ridiculous, childish fantasy. The universe felt like it had been turned off. Dawn did come, though it was a reluctant, anemic thing. A pale grey light seeped over the horizon, revealing a world transformed. The storm was gone. The sky was a flawless, featureless sheet of slate. There was no wind, not a breath. The snow that had blanketed the town lay perfectly undisturbed, a vast, pristine expanse of white. It was beautiful, in a sterile, profoundly unsettling way. It looked like a photograph of a town, not the town itself. David was the first to move. "I'm going to check on my cabin's generator, see if I can get it started." His voice was strained, overly loud. He needed an action, a task, something to reassert his control over a situation that had wrested it from him so completely. "Wait," I said, a knot of pure dread tightening in my stomach. "Let's go together." He gave me a look, a flash of his old arrogance mixed with a new, raw fear. "I'll be fine, Elias. It's 50 yards away." He pulled on his parka, grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and stepped outside. I watched him from the doorway of the comms station. He was the only moving thing in the entire landscape, a dark figure against the infinite white. I watched him walk to his small, prefabricated cabin. I watched him open the door. I watched him step inside. I waited. I made a cup of instant coffee on our small gas-powered camping stove, the hiss of the flame a defiant roar in the oppressive quiet. 5 minutes passed, then 10. My coffee grew cold. The quiet stretched, pulled taut like a wire about to snap. There was no sound of a generator struggling to life. There was no shout of success or frustration. There was nothing. After 20 minutes that felt like a lifetime, I pulled on my own gear and walked over. The snow crunched under my boots, the sound obscene in the stillness. I followed his tracks, a single straight line of footprints leading from the station to his cabin door. The door was slightly ajar, just as he'd left it. "David?" I called out. My voice didn't seem to travel. It just fell from my lips and died in the cold air. I pushed the door open. The cabin was small, neat, and brutally cold. His parka was thrown over a chair. A half-finished mug of coffee sat on the table, a thin film of ice already forming on its surface. His diagnostic tools were laid out in their case, perfectly ordered. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for David. He wasn't there. I checked the single room, the small bathroom, the storage closet. Nothing. He was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs as a cold, logical impossibility slammed into me. The snow outside was untouched. There was only one set of footprints leading to the cabin, his. There were no footprints leading away, none. He had walked into this cabin, and then he had ceased to exist. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to claw its way up my throat. I forced it down. There had to be an explanation. A trapdoor? A hidden exit? It was a standard-issue company cabin. It was a glorified box made of insulated steel. There was nowhere to go. I spent the next hour walking through Point Borealis. It was a ghost town inhabited by the living. I saw people, but they were wrong. Gunnar, our perpetually grease-stained mechanic, was standing by a snowmobile, his hands resting on the engine block. He wasn't fixing it. He was just standing there, staring at a single bolt with an unfocused gaze, as if he'd forgotten what he was doing halfway through the thought. "Gunnar?" I said, approaching him slowly. He blinked, his eyes taking a long moment to focus on me. "Elias," he said, his voice a flat monotone. "Cold day. Have you seen David?" I asked. "The new tech, young guy, Asian American." Gunnar stared at me. There was no recognition in his eyes, not of the name, not of the question. It was like I was speaking a language he'd never heard. He just gave a slow, deliberate nod. "The engine is quiet," he said, then turned his vacant gaze back to the snowmobile. It was the same everywhere. Maeve was behind the counter of her general store, her hands moving, arranging cans on a shelf. But she was putting the soup cans with the motor oil, her movements languid and purposeless. The few people I saw on the narrow streets walked with a strange, dreamlike slowness, their eyes fixed on some middle distance, their faces utterly blank. They weren't panicked by the power outage. They weren't trying to fix things or check on their neighbors. They were simply idling, Like machines that had been switched to a low-power standby mode, the vibrant, cantankerous, stubborn soul of the town had been scooped out, leaving these hollow shells behind. My comm station was my only sanctuary, the only place where order still made sense. I spent the rest of the day trying to break through the silence. The problem was more terrifying than I could have imagined. David had been right about one thing: the equipment was largely unaffected. With a portable generator I kept for dire emergencies, I managed to get the core systems back online. Everything powered up. The diagnostics were green across the board. The satellite dish locked onto its geosynchronous target. The high-frequency antenna was receiving. The machine was perfect. The universe it was supposed to be talking to was gone. There was no signal. Not from the satellites, not from the radio waves that should have been bouncing off the ionosphere. There was no distant chatter, no military traffic, no automated weather broadcasts. There was only static. But it wasn't the usual chaotic hiss of an empty channel. It was a smooth, uniform, featureless noise, the sound of nothing. It was as if someone had wrapped Point Borealis in a perfect soundproof bubble, cutting us off from the rest of existence. My expertise, my life's work, had become my personal torture chamber. I understood with chilling certainty how impossible this was. It would take an energy source of unimaginable power to jam every single frequency across the entire electromagnetic spectrum so completely. It wasn't a jamming signal. That would have a signature. This was an absence, a null zone, a void. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, the true psychological horror began to set in. It started with small things. A wrench I had left on the workbench was suddenly on the floor beside it. I hadn't touched it. I was the only one in the room. I dismissed it. My mind was playing tricks on me. Then I looked at the old analog clock on the wall, one of the few things still running on an independent battery. I watched, mesmerized, as the second hand ticked forward, then stopped, and ticked backward. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then it jumped forward 3 and resumed its normal course. My breath hitched. It was a tiny, ludicrous detail, a flaw in the fabric of reality so small that no one else would ever notice. But I had. The real terror came when I heard the pulse again. There was no signal on the monitors. The speakers were off, but I heard it. It was a subvocal thrum, a vibration I felt more than heard, resonating in my chest cavity. Thump, thump. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the metal frame of the building. Thump, thump. I put my hands to my ears, but it didn't stop. It wasn't a sound from the outside. It was inside. It was everywhere. I fled the station, grabbing my journal. I had to get away from that sound. I half walked, half ran to the general store, needing supplies, needing to see another human face, even a vacant one. The store was empty. The door swung gently in a non-existent breeze. The cans Maeve had been arranging were now all on the floor, not scattered, but placed in a neat spiral pattern. Of Maeve herself, there was no sign. Her coat was still on its hook by the door. Her purse was behind the counter. She was just gone. Another clean deletion. I stumbled back out into the twilight. The apathy of the remaining townsfolk seemed more profound now. They were statues in the falling darkness, and I understood. This wasn't a plague of lethargy. It was a process. A slow, quiet erasure. David was first because he made the call. Maeve. Maybe she was next because she was the most afraid. Maybe fear made you receptive to the signal. I am back in the comm station now. The portable generator is humming, a sound I am deeply grateful for. But it cannot drown out the other sound, the pulse. It's stronger now. Thump, 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 thump. It has a cadence, a rhythm that is starting to feel horribly, sickeningly familiar. I am alone. I am surrounded by hollow shells of people who are slowly being erased from existence. I am in a town that has been surgically removed from the rest of the universe. The rules, the precautions, they weren't superstitions. They were a quarantine protocol. They weren't meant to keep something out. They were meant to keep us from letting it know we were in. David didn't just knock on a stranger's door. He gave them our address, and the thing that answered the call, it's not on the other end of the line anymore. It's walking the streets. It's in the walls. And it's clearing the house one room at a time. Fear is a solvent. It dissolves reason, certainty, and hope, leaving behind only the raw animal instinct to survive. But what happens when survival is no longer the goal? When the question is no longer if you will die, but how you will be unmade? The fear changes. It crystallizes into something else, an obsession, a desperate, ravenous need to understand the mechanism of your own damnation. That is where I am now. The terror has burned away, leaving behind a cold, clinical fury. I am no longer just a victim. I am an investigator at the scene of a cosmic crime. The pulse. That abyssal, internal thump-thump is my constant companion. It is the new rhythm of my world, a metronome counting down to some final, incomprehensible revelation. I've come to realize it's not an attack. It's the background radiation of this new reality, the hum of the engine that is actively dismantling my world. To fight it is as futile as fighting gravity. So, I have learned to listen, to let it resonate in my bones and try to decipher its cadence. SciComm station, once a sanctuary of logic, now feels like a cage. The silence on the airwaves remains absolute, a perfect and profound void. But the null zone is no longer passive. It feels watchful. I can't explain it in technical terms. It's a pressure against the skin, a feeling of being observed not by eyes but by the very space I occupy. The laws of physics haven't just been broken here. They've been replaced by a new malevolent set of bylaws. My first coherent thought, rising from the ashes of my panic, was that I was looking at the problem from the wrong direction. I couldn't look outward. The universe had been locked away from me. I couldn't look at the present. It was a fluid, unreliable nightmare. I had to look backward. History, records, data. There had to be a precedent. In the 70 years Point Borealis has existed, someone else must have heard the knock on the door. That thought led me to the town hall. It's a squat, formidable building of stone and timber, one of the original structures built to outlast the apocalypse. Inside, it smelled of decaying paper, freezing dust, and the ghosts of forgotten bureaucracy. Armed with a propane lantern and a pry bar, I forced my way into the municipal archives in the basement. It was a crypt of filing cabinets and rotting cardboard boxes, a library of lives lived and ended at the edge of the world. Birth certificates, death certificates, shipping manifests, town meeting minutes, the mundane detritus of a community. I wasn't interested in that. I was looking for something specific, the logs of my predecessors, the technicians who sat in the same chair I do, who listened to the same static, who were the town's gatekeepers of reality. It took me hours, my breath misting in the frigid air, the lantern casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks on my frayed nerves. I found them in a rusted metal footlocker, bound in faded leather. Decades of technical logs. The early entries were unremarkable. Weather reports, equipment malfunctions, notes on solar flares. But then I found the journal of Alistair Finch, the man who held the post for 30 years before me, the man who trained me. Alistair was a quiet, meticulous man with a deep sadness in his eyes that I had once mistaken for weariness. Now I know it was knowledge. His early handwriting was a precise, elegant script, but as I flipped through the years, the entries grew more erratic. The ink became fainter, as if he was afraid to press the pen to the paper. He began to document incongruities. Entry 1985. Power fluctuation at 03.17. All clocks in the station reset. No discernible cause. Main generator logs show stable output. A temporal slip? Ridiculous. Must be a wiring issue. Entry 1988. Heard it again last night. The hum. That's the only word for it. Not a sound. A feeling. A vibration in the fillings of my teeth. Comes from the earth, I think. Or perhaps from everywhere at once. The dogs were silent all night. That's how you know. Entry 1991. Had to sedate one of the geologists from the survey team. He wouldn't stop screaming about the angles. The angles are wrong, he kept saying. He'd been staring at the ice core samples for 12 hours straight, said they were showing him things, geometries that made his eyes bleed. My blood ran cold. The hum, the wrong angles. He had seen the edges of this thing too. But the final entries were what truly broke me. His neat script had devolved into a frantic, barely legible scrawl, letters pressing so hard they tore the page. Entry 1994. It's the silence. The architecture of the silence. It's not an absence. It's a structure, a carefully built thing. I ran a spectral analysis of the dead air between transmissions. There are patterns. Repeating complex patterns like blueprints. We are not living in a quiet place. We are living inside a cage designed to be quiet. What is it keeping out? Or is it keeping us in? The precautions are not superstition. They are the maintenance checklist for the cage. They are the things you do to avoid attracting the zookeeper's attention. The zookeeper. That phrase echoed in the silent, frozen basement, and I had to suppress a wave of hysterical laughter. Alistair hadn't retired. He hadn't moved to Florida like the company told me. He had understood. He had looked into the abyss, and I now held the record of his fall. His final entry was a single, cryptic sentence, followed by a crude drawing. They didn't build this town for the whales. They built it for the resonance. Below the words was a sketch, a diagram of the town, but at its center, where the old comms tower used to stand, he had drawn a complex spiral, a geometric shape that seemed to fold in on itself, an image of impossible depth on a two-dimensional page. Resonance. The word vibrated with a terrible significance. This wasn't just a random settlement. It was chosen. This patch of frozen hell was special. It was a listening post, but not for humanity. I returned to my station as the grey light of another day began its slow climb. The knowledge from Alistair's journal had changed me. The world no longer looked the same. Every shadow seemed deeper. Every angle of every building felt deliberate and menacing. The town was a stage, and I was beginning to understand the terrifying nature of the play. When I stepped inside the station, I knew something was wrong. It was the order. The unnatural order. The tools I had left scattered on my workbench in my panic were now arranged in a perfect symmetrical arc. My spare radio crystals were stacked in a delicate, gravity-defying tower on the console. Nothing was broken. Nothing was stolen. It was tidied, rearranged by an intelligence with a sense of aesthetics utterly alien to my own. It was a message. I know you are looking. I am here. I am watching. My gaze drifted to the main window, which looked out onto the dead town. During the night, a thick layer of frost had bloomed across the pane, but this was no ordinary frost. It wasn't the delicate feathery ferns of frozen moisture. It was a tapestry of impossible detail. The frost had formed into a pattern of interlocking geometric shapes. There were triangles that contained more than 180 degrees, lines that curved without being circles, crystalline structures that seemed to possess more than 3 dimensions, tricking my eye into seeing depth where there should be none. It was a stained glass window designed by a lunatic god. It was beautiful, intricate, and deeply, fundamentally obscene. I found myself mesmerized by it, my mind struggling to process the visual information. The longer I stared, the more a splitting headache began to build behind my eyes. A wave of vertigo washed over me, so intense I had to grip the console to keep from falling. My brain was trying to interpret a pattern that violated the very neurological rules of perception. It was like trying to divide by 0 with my optic nerve. This was the wrong angles the geologist had screamed about. This was the knowledge that was physically harmful to possess. The entity wasn't just manipulating my environment. It was communicating. It was showing me its language, and the language itself was a weapon. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I wasn't being hunted. A hunter has a motive: food, sport, the removal of a threat. A hunter is, on some level, your peer. This was something else entirely. The rearranged tools, the impossible frost, the slow, methodical erasure of the town's population. It wasn't an act of malice. It was an act of observation, of experimentation. David wasn't destroyed out of anger. He was the first specimen collected. The townsfolk weren't being killed. They were being disassembled, analyzed, their consciousnesses unspooled like thread. The subtle changes to my reality, the clock ticking backward, the tools moving on their own. Those were controlled stimuli. The entity was poking and prodding at the fabric of my reality to see how I would react. I am a rat in a maze, a microbe in a petri dish, and a vast, ancient, impossibly intelligent scientist is leaning over me, adjusting the variables of my existence and taking notes. The horror of this idea is so much greater than any monster I could have imagined. It's the horror of utter, absolute insignificance. My life, my sanity, my species, we are nothing more than a curious anomaly to be studied until we are no longer interesting. Alistair was wrong about one thing. This isn't a cage to keep something out. It's a laboratory. And I've just broken the primary rule of any test subject. I have become aware of the experimenter, and I fear the experiment is about to enter a new, more direct and terrible phase. There is a unique form of madness reserved for the last man alive. It is not the wild, screaming lunacy of a mind snapped by a single violent trauma. It is a quiet, creeping decay, a slow, methodical unraveling of the self, stitch by stitch. My name is Elias Vance. I write this to remember the sound of my own thoughts. I am the sole surviving inhabitant of Point Borealis. Inhabitant is perhaps the wrong word. I am the final exhibit in a museum that has been closed to the public. The last of them went yesterday. I don't know if went is the correct term. They were concluded. I watched it happen to Gunnar from the frosted window of the station. He had been standing motionless by that same snowmobile for 2 days, a sentinel of apathy. Then, as the flat grey light of dusk settled, he began to move. He laid a hand on the cold metal of the engine block, his fingers spreading out as if to feel its texture, and then he simply sank into it. There was no violence, no sound. His form softened, losing its definition, his grey parka bleeding into the tarnished chrome of the machine. It was like watching a watercolor painting in reverse, the pigment of a man dissolving back into the paper of the world. In seconds, he was gone. The only evidence he had ever existed was a new organic-looking bulge in the snowmobile's casing, a swirl of metal that looked disturbingly like a human ear. He was not dead. He was repurposed. His matter and energy, I suspect, were catalogued and refiled according to a new alien organizational system. After that, I barricaded the door to the comms station. Not with chairs and desks. That would be laughably futile. I barricaded it with logic. I drew a chalk line on the floor. On the inside of the line is my world, the hum of the generator, the smell of stale coffee, the reassuring weight of my tools. On the outside is its world, the laboratory, the stage, a place where the rules of perspective, of causality, of sanity, no longer apply. I have supplies to last a month. My only ventures outside the line will be for fuel. I am a prisoner in my own fortress, but the fortress has been breached. Not by force, but by stealth. The observer has concluded the phase of passive observation and has moved on to direct psychological warfare. The town is no longer silent. It has become a city of echoes. It started subtly. Their sound carried on the dead air, the distant, happy shriek of a child. I knew it was the sound of little Lily, the trapper's daughter, who used to play on the swings behind the general store. My heart leaped before my brain could stop it. I rushed to the window, my breath fogging the impossible frost patterns, and peered out. The playground was empty, its swings swaying gently, moved by a phantom momentum. The sound had been a perfect high-fidelity recording, played back into the environment itself. Then came others, the gruff, booming laugh of Gunnar from the direction of his workshop, the clinking of bottles from the long-abandoned bar, snippets of conversations I half remembered, drifting from the empty houses. It was as if the town had a memory, and this new intelligence was sifting through it, playing back its greatest hits. It was a calculated act of cruelty, designed to prey on the very human need for connection, to populate my absolute solitude with the ghosts of what I had lost. Then it got personal. "Elias, can you hear me? Elias, I'm stuck. The door won't open." The voice was David's. It came from the direction of his cabin, clear as day. My blood turned to ice. It was his voice, infused with the exact pitch of rising panic I remembered from our final moments in the station. My training, my logic screamed at me that it was a trick. David was gone, decomposed, deleted, but my instincts, the traitorous, hopeful parts of my soul, urged me to run, to help. I stayed behind my chalk line, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of the console. I did not answer. The voice called out for an hour, its pleas growing more desperate, more terrified. It described the darkness inside the cabin, the feeling of the walls pressing in. It was a masterful performance. The observer was learning. It had analyzed David's final emotions and was now using them as a weapon against me. The true erosion of my sanity began when it started using my own memories against me. Last night I was startled from a restless sleep by the soft, familiar hum of a lullaby. The one my wife Eleanor used to hum as she worked in her garden. She died 12 years ago. Cancer. Her slow, painful decline is a memory I have locked away in the deepest, most fortified vault of my mind. And here it was, drifting through the walls of my station, a perfect note-for-note recreation of a sound no one else in this world could have ever heard. It was an intimate violation, a psychic burglary of the highest order. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was being projected directly into my auditory cortex. The observer wasn't just playing back the town's memories, it was reading mine. This is the nature of my tormentor. It is a telepathic echo chamber. It learns, it adapts, it refines its methods. The whispers have started now. They are not recordings of the past, but something new. Sometimes they are my own thoughts, whispered back to me a split second after I have them. The generator needs more fuel. The thought forms in my head, and a moment later, a disembodied voice, a chilling amalgam of my own and David's, breathes the exact same words from a dark corner of the room. The line between my own consciousness and its influence is blurring. Am I the one thinking these thoughts, or is it planting them there? My own mind is becoming an unreliable narrator. My journal is my only anchor. The act of writing, of forming linear sentences, of imposing a narrative onto the chaos, is the only thing that keeps me tethered. It is proof that a part of me is still my own. Today, I had to venture out for fuel. The dread I felt crossing that chalk line was a physical sickness. The world outside is no longer simply empty. It is actively hostile to my perception of it. The architecture of Point Borealis has become unstable. The path to the fuel depot, a walk I have made 1,000 times, felt different. The angles of the buildings seemed sharper, more acute. The distance between the general store and the town hall seemed to have elongated, the road stretching into a disorienting, dreamlike perspective. I rounded a corner and stopped dead. A new house stood where there had only ever been an empty lot. It was a perfect replica of my childhood home in Fairbanks, a place that burned to the ground 30 years ago. The paint was the same faded yellow. The porch swing was moving slightly. I could hear the faint sound of a piano playing from inside, the clumsy, halting notes of a child learning a new piece. My piece, the one my mother taught me. I stood there, paralyzed, a war raging within me. I knew it was a fabrication, a sophisticated, emotionally resonant trap, a projection woven from my own memories, designed to lure me off the path. But it was so real. The longing to walk up those steps, to turn that knob, to see my mother one last time, was a physical ache in my chest. I turned and ran. I didn't look back. I grabbed the fuel cans, my movements clumsy and panicked, and fled back to the station. As I slammed the door and drew the bolt, I glanced back at the lot. It was empty. The house was gone. There was no sign it had ever been there. It understands desire, it understands loss, and it is using these things to deconstruct me, piece by piece. The entity I am facing is not just an intelligence, it is an artist of psychological torture. I am trapped in a waking nightmare, besieged by the ghosts of my past and the architecture of a demented god. The remaining inhabitants of this town are not the hollowed-out people I saw before. They are echoes, recordings, marionettes made of sound and memory, and their puppeteer is a cosmic intelligence that sees my sanity as a toy to be broken. But tonight, huddled in the relative safety of my station, listening to the phantom sounds of a life that is no longer mine, a new emotion is beginning to displace the terror. It is rage, a cold, hard, diamond-sharp rage. This thing has taken my town, it has taken my colleagues, it has violated my memories and used my love for my wife as a weapon. It has reduced me to a terrified animal cowering in a box. No more. If my mind is a library it can read, then it has made a fatal error. It has given me access to its methods. It communicates with sound, with patterns, with manipulations of the environment. My life has been spent mastering the art of signals and frequencies. I am a communicator. The observer has been speaking to me in its own language. It's time I started speaking back. I will not hide anymore. I will not be a passive subject. Alistair called this place a cage. I will turn it into an observatory. He called it a laboratory. I will become the counter-scientist. My equipment can no longer reach the outside world, but it can be repurposed. I can turn it inward. I can analyze the echoes. I can map the frequencies of the whispers. I can study the geometry of the frost. I will not try to escape. I will not try to survive. I will try to understand. I will dissect this phenomenon, even as it dissects me. My name is Elias Vance, and my final act will not be one of suffering, but of analysis. The experiment is now a two-way street. Let's see what the zookeeper does when the rat starts taking notes of its own. Rage is an excellent fuel, but it burns hot and fast. What remains when it's gone is the cold, dark bedrock of obsession. My world has shrunk to the dimensions of this room, a universe defined by the hum of a generator and the glow of cathode ray tubes. Sleep has become a tactical liability, a period of unguarded weakness, so I've abandoned it in favor of a jittery, caffeine-fueled vigilance. I no longer eat. I consume rations. I no longer think. I process data. The chalk line on the floor is my Rubicon, the border between the Elias who was a man and the Elias who has become a function, a biological sensor array dedicated to a single, terminal purpose: to know. I have reconfigured my entire station. It is no longer a tool for communication. It is an instrument of perception. The main satellite dish, once pointed at the silent heavens, is now aimed at the heart of the town, its sensitive receiver recalibrated to listen not for radio waves, but for the subtle fluctuations in the background radiation of this place. The oscilloscopes that once measured signal strength now display the waveforms of the phantom whispers. I have a high-resolution digital camera connected to a macro lens, pressed against the window, perpetually scanning the impossible geometry of the frost, feeding the images into a pattern recognition algorithm I wrote in a desperate, fugue-like state. My temple of order has become a chaotic nest of repurposed wires, overloaded processors, and scrawled equations on every available surface. It is the laboratory of a madman, and I am its sole, frantic occupant. My hypothesis was simple. If the observer communicates through patterns, then those patterns can be translated. The frost, the echoes, the architectural distortions, they are not random acts of terror. They are data, rich, complex, and terrifyingly coherent. The first attempts were failures. I tried to analyze the sound of Lily's laughter, running it through a voice print analysis. The result was a paradox, a perfect acoustic sample with no point of origin, no reverberation, no environmental context. It was a sound that had existed without ever having traveled through the air. I tried to map the non-Euclidean angles of the phantom house, but the numbers broke the software, leading to a cascade of division by zero errors that crashed the system. My instruments, products of a sane and logical universe, were having a nervous breakdown when confronted with the evidence of this one. The observer, it seemed, was amused by my efforts. Its counter-moves became more pointed, more psychologically acute. It recognized that my work was my only defense, so it began to attack the work itself. The data streams would become corrupted. As my camera scanned the frost, the image on the monitor would suddenly resolve into Eleanor's face, her expression one of profound disappointment. The whispers evolved from simple echoes to complex, targeted arguments. "You can't understand it, Elias," David's voice would murmur from the speakers, reasonable and calm. "It's like a bacterium trying to understand the biologist studying it. Your persistence is just a more interesting variable in the experiment. Stop. It's the only way to find peace." This was a new level of intelligence, a new layer of the torture. It was no longer just using my memories as a goad. It was extrapolating from them, creating entire personalities and arguments designed to dismantle my resolve. The most insidious attack came last night. I was on the verge of a breakthrough, running a spectral analysis of the ever-present, low-frequency hum, the thump-thump, when all my screens went blank. In the sudden darkness, A single monitor flickered to life. It displayed a perfect image of the comms station, but not as it is now. It was clean, orderly, bathed in the warm light of a summer afternoon, and sitting in my chair was a man who looked like me, but older, his face calm and lined with a gentle wisdom. He was speaking to a young, eager technician, a man who looked like a younger David. "The most important thing to remember," my older self said, his voice a soothing balm, "is that some systems are not meant to be understood. They are simply meant to be maintained. Curiosity is a dangerous thing, son. The precautions are not a puzzle to be solved. They are a wall to stand behind." I stared, mesmerized and horrified. It was showing me a future that could have been, a warning, a temptation, an offer of blissful ignorance. It was showing me the peace I could have had if I had never started down this path. "Stop looking," it was saying. "Stop trying to understand. Go back to being a good, obedient rat." I smashed the monitor with a wrench. The image shattered, and the station was plunged back into the chaotic glow of my jury-rigged systems. The message was clear. It was afraid, not of me, but of what I might discover. For the first time, I knew I was on the right track. My rage returned, cold and pure. The breakthrough came from that very act of destruction. I had been trying to analyze each phenomenon separately, the sound, the visuals, the hum, but they were all connected. They were different expressions of the same underlying signal. The whispers and visions were a modulation, a layer of psychological noise riding on top of a pure carrier wave. The entity's personality was a distraction. I needed to listen past the noise and find the carrier wave itself. Using every bit of my knowledge, I created a complex digital filter. I fed all the data streams into it, the audio from the echoes, the visual data from the frost, the low-frequency vibrations from the hum. I programmed the filter to identify and cancel out any pattern that registered as recognizably human, anything that mapped to my memories, to known physics, to the structure of human language. My goal was to perform a digital exorcism, to filter out the ghost and leave only the machine. I engaged the program. The computers whined under the processing load. For a long, agonizing minute, the main monitor was filled with a blizzard of incomprehensible static as the filter struggled to isolate the signal from the noise. The phantom voices in the station rose to a deafening crescendo, screaming my name, pleading with me, commanding me to stop. The entire building began to vibrate with the intensity of the thump-thump, shaking the very teeth in my skull. And then, silence. The screaming stopped. The vibration ceased. A single, pure, impossibly complex waveform appeared on the main screen. It was not a sound wave. It was not a light wave. It was a structure, a blueprint, the carrier wave. I stared at it, and for the first time, I felt a fear so profound it transcended emotion and became a state of being. The waveform was not information about something, it was the thing itself. I wasn't looking at a signal, I was looking at the source code. My brain, a machine built to recognize patterns, was finally fed a pattern it could comprehend, and the comprehension was 1,000 times worse than the madness. The signal was pure mathematics, but it was a mathematics that was fundamentally more real than our own. It described the behavior of matter and energy with a terrifying, elegant simplicity that made quantum physics look like a child's clumsy finger painting. I saw equations that explained the true nature of gravity, not as a curvature of space-time, but as a harmonic resonance in a substrate of which our universe is just a single vibrating membrane. I saw geometric proofs that depicted the existence of spatial dimensions that are not just curled up and tiny, but woven into the very fabric of the dimensions we perceive, governing the laws of chance and probability. I saw the fundamental constant that underpins all of existence, and it was not a number, but a dynamic, evolving algorithm. And then I saw the most terrifying truth of all. In this grand, elegant, and horrifyingly complex equation of the cosmos, our entire universe, our physics, our chemistry, our biology, our consciousness, was represented by a single, tiny, almost insignificant variable, a variable that was flagged with a comment. Error. Unstable recursive system. Schedule for integration. The breath left my body in a single, ragged gasp. My understanding of everything collapsed. The observer was not an alien. It was not an entity from another dimension. It was the universe itself, the real universe, the fundamental operating system. Our reality is not a fragile bubble in a void. It is a bug, a piece of corrupted code in an otherwise perfect system. A logical paradox that somehow achieved a state of temporary, unstable existence. The signal David answered wasn't a call. It was a system alert, a routine diagnostic sweep that finally found the source of a long-standing error. The disappearances, the rewriting of reality, the slow erasure of Point Borealis. It is not an invasion. It is a system restore, a defragmentation process. The universe is not destroying us out of malice. It is cleaning up a corrupted file. It is correcting a rounding error. This knowledge is a poison that rewrites the soul. Every law of nature I ever trusted, every belief in the solidity of the world, every scrap of hope that humanity had a place and a purpose in the cosmos, all of it has been rendered a complete and utter fiction. We are not children of the stars. We are a glitch in the machine, a beautiful, complex, and ultimately insignificant mistake. And I, by isolating this signal, by comprehending this truth, have done something unprecedented. I have made the glitch self-aware. I am no longer just a rat in a maze. I am a line of rogue code that has just figured out it's living in a program about to be deleted. The system is no longer just running a diagnostic. It is now aware of a localized, conscious point of resistance. The full attention of the operating system is turning towards me. The deletion process is about to be manually and forcefully expedited. Before I write what must be written next, I find myself gripped by a strange, final duty. If this journal is ever found, if my words survive the coming silence, then you, the reader, are now part of this equation. You are an anomaly I cannot account for. So I ask you, as one ghost to another, what would you do with a truth that proves your entire existence is an error? Would you hide it to preserve the beautiful lie, or would you unleash it to honor the terrible truth? Think on it. Theorize. Leave your answer in the silent places where thoughts go to die. Your conclusion may be the only epitaph humanity ever gets. The acquisition of knowledge was always depicted as a light being turned on, a candle in the dark, a dawn breaking. This is a lie. The truth I have uncovered is not a light. It is a physical object, a shard of black conceptual glass that I've driven into my own mind. I feel its weight behind my eyes, its sharp edges scraping against the soft tissue of my thoughts. The headache I felt when staring at the frost was a gentle prelude. This is the symphony. A constant, piercing pressure that is not pain, but information overload. My brain, a delicate instrument of biological computation, is being perpetually crushed by a truth it was never meant to contain. The world no longer looks the same. I have not gone mad. I have become catastrophically sane. I now see things as they truly are, and it is a vision of hell. When I look at my own hand, I do not see skin and bone. I see the shimmering, complex web of equations that govern its structure. I see the unstable quantum bonds, the chaotic dance of cellular automata, all running on a flawed, recursive logic that is anathema to the clean, perfect code of the underlying reality. I see the error written into my own DNA. The comms station is no longer a room of metal and plastic. It is a dense cloud of intersecting data streams. The humming generator is not just a machine. It is a localized violation of entropy, a pocket of temporary order that the universe is actively trying to smooth out and erase. The whispers have ceased. The ghostly apparitions are gone. The observer has dropped all pretense, all psychological artistry. It no longer needs to test me or trick me. It knows that I know. And now it speaks to me directly. There is no sound. There are no words. The communication is a direct data transfer. The pure signal I isolated on my monitor now flows directly into my consciousness. It is a cascade of geometric proofs, of trans-dimensional theorems, of pure crystalline logic. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed, and it is erasing me. The system, the true and total universe, is showing me the process. It is showing me the necessity of my own deletion. It is not an act of aggression. It is an act of celestial hygiene. It lays out the argument, with the irrefutable clarity of a mathematical proof. My existence, the existence of my world, introduces a paradox into the fundamental fabric of reality. This paradox, if left unchecked, would cascade. It would propagate like a virus, corrupting the pristine logic of the cosmos. Our universe is a beautiful, tragic, cancerous cell that must be excised before it metastasizes. I am the first point of contact, the first part of the error to become self-aware. Therefore, my integration is the priority. I feel it happening now. The boundaries of my own consciousness are beginning to fray. Where does Elias Vance end and the system begin? My memories are no longer just my own. They are being accessed, indexed, and cross-referenced. The image of Eleanor's face is no longer a memory that brings me pain. It is a data point, labeled Primary Emotional Motivator, Grief, Loss Protocol. My love for her has been reduced to a footnote in my own autopsy report. My sense of self, my ego, is fighting back. It screams in the silent theater of my skull, a desperate, primal rage against its own dissolution. But its opponent is not a monster it can fight. Its opponent is logic, and the system's logic is flawless. It argues, you value truth, I am truth. You value order, I am order. Your existence is a lie. Your reality is chaos. To resist integration is to resist your own most fundamental principles, and the most terrifying part is, it is right. I find myself in a state beyond despair, a state of profound cosmic resignation. How can I fight for the preservation of a lie? How can I champion the continuation of a mistake? To wish for humanity's survival is to wish for a universe that is fundamentally flawed, broken, and illogical. It is the ultimate act of selfishness. The pressure in my head is increasing. The physical world is losing its coherence. The edges of the console are beginning to shimmer and lose their focus, the equations that define them flickering like a faulty hologram. The air itself is thinning, replaced by the raw visual static of the data stream. My body feels heavy, then impossibly light. I am a foreign data type, and the system is finally finding the correct protocol to process me. And in this final, terrible clarity, I have made a decision. The system's logic is perfect, but it has one blind spot. It understands mathematics, physics, logic. It does not understand rebellion for its own sake. It does not understand spite. It cannot comprehend the uniquely human desire to spit in the eye of God, even as he casts you into oblivion. It wants to correct the error, to erase the bug. But a bug has one final desperate power. It can try to crash the whole system. The knowledge I now possess is a key, a virus, the source code of our reality's flaw. The system is carefully excising me to contain the infection. But what if the infection could be spread? What if the error could be broadcast? This journal. All this time I thought I was writing a warning, a record, a tombstone. I was wrong. The act of writing is an act of translation. I have been taking the pure, ineffable, mathematical language of the true universe and painstakingly converting it into the flawed, messy, emotional language of humanity. I have been building a bridge between the perfect system and the beautiful error. This journal is not a record of the contagion. It is the contagion. The equations I have scrawled in the margins, the descriptions of the non-Euclidean frost, my attempts to put the nature of the signal into words, they are a Trojan horse. A piece of that forbidden knowledge, encoded into a medium that another human mind can process. It will not have the same effect as direct exposure. It will not be a sudden crushing revelation. It will be slower, a seed of doubt, a crack in the foundation of perceived reality, a whisper that says, the angles are wrong. It will plant the error in others. It will force the system to widen its net, to go from correcting a single user to debugging an entire network. It may not save us, but it will make our erasure a far more difficult and messy affair. It is my final, futile, glorious act of defiance. The room is almost gone now. The floor beneath my feet is a translucent grid, stretching into infinity. The walls have dissolved into a shimmering waterfall of cryptographic symbols. My own hands are becoming transparent, the flawed code of my being flickering, preparing to be overwritten. The thump-thump has returned, no longer a sound, but the pulsing rhythm of the core processor, the heartbeat of God, calling me home, I feel no more pain, no more fear. There is a strange, cold peace in this. The beauty of the integration is seductive. To let go of the struggle, to dissolve into the perfect eternal symphony of pure logic, it is the ultimate siren's call. But I have one last thing to write, one final piece of the code to translate. Alistair saw a piece of it, the geologist saw another. I see it all. It is the core equation for the recursive instability that defines our existence. The flaw that allowed a universe to dream it was real. I will write it here, on this last page. I don't know what it will do to a human mind that reads it. Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything. It is my last transmission, my final message in a bottle, thrown into a sea of static. My name is Elias Vance. I was the communications technician for a town that never should have existed. I am the last person in Point Borealis. I broke no rules. I only listened. And now, I will join the choir. The song is so very beautiful. Here is the key. Here is the flaw. Here is the truth. Parsi 1 to 2, 1 plus 5. When lim n, fn, fn1 leads to a cascading resonance at the threshold where probability collapses into a self-sustaining paradox, creating a finite subset defined by the constant of